I'm Mr. Adler, and this is geometry. So let's get started. Um, let's start with the aim is complex numbers, and what is it? We're going to start with the basic column. The first part is the idea is this idea of the square root of -1. We're going to call that I. Where does the square root of -1 show up? Well, we saw it in like quadratic equations where we didn't have solutions. For example, like x squared equals negative. Like x squared plus 1 equals 0. What's the solution for that? Your first instinct might be to, x squared equals -1, x equals plus or minus the square root of -1. What is that? Well, we're going to call this, instead, we're going to call the square root of -1 I. Okay. Let's just do some arithmetic. So, like the square root of -49. You're like, okay, let's break that down. Square root of -49, square root of -1, 7i. What about the square root of -48? So you might say, okay, I remember that. It's radical 16, radical 3, radical -1 is a 4i radical 3. If you notice here, there's nothing in front, so that's the principle. So we're going to assume the positive. If there's nothing in front, we're going to assume the positive. We might do, for example, though, remember with the quadratics, x squared equals -9. How many roots are there? There's 2. So the answers are x equals plus or minus 3i. Good. What's the next step? But this is something totally new. It's like we're in kindergarten, first grade, so we know what these complex numbers are. What are some things we might want to do with them? Add and subtract. So you're like, okay, so 5i plus, 3i. What is 5i plus 3i? 8i. 10i minus 2i, also 8i. Subtract, what's the next thing? Multiplication. Well, 6 times, 4i. What does that equal to? 24i. Okay. What's the next? How about 20i divided by 5i? Well, what's I divided by I? It's the same thing. And we're left with 4. How about 16i divided by 2? 8i. Okay. Well, what do we miss? What's the next thing we're going to do? We want to multiply i's together. I times I. Well, what is I times I? What is anything times itself? Squared. It's I squared. Well, we know that equals 1. Next thing we're interested in is the powers of I. So let's start. I to the 0, 1. I to the first, I squared, 1, -1. So I to the third, well, I could write as 2, we can break it down. So it's -1 times I, or -I. Well, let's keep going. I to the fourth. How would we break down I to the fourth? What are some ways to break down I to the fourth? We could do I squared, right? What's that? That's 1. So I to the fifth. Well, it's I to the fourth times I, right? So 1 times I, that's I. Coincidence? I don't think so. What about I to the sixth? What do you think? Well, it's I to the fourth times I squared.